German settlement. By the end of World War II, the German language, which had always been used with English for public and official matters, was in serious decline. Today, German is preserved mainly through singing groups and recipes, with Germans from Russia in the northern Great Plains states speaking predominantly English. German remains the second most spoken language in North and South Dakota, and Germans from Russia often use loanwords such as Kuchen for cake. Despite the loss of their language, the ethnic group remains distinct and has left a lasting impression on the American West. The Civil War. Settlement from German Americans was largely anti-slavery, especially around the 48ers. Hundreds of thousands of German American volunteers fought for the Union in the American Civil War, whereas the South was mostly Anglophone or French speaking. The Germans were the largest immigrant group to participate in the Civil War, with over 176,000 US soldiers were born in Germany. A popular Union commander among Germans was Major General Franz Sigel, who was the highest ranking German officer in the Union Army, with German immigrants claiming to enlist to fight with Mr. Sigel. The German vote in 1900 was in doubt. They opposed the repudiation policy of Bryan, but also disliked the overseas expression of McKinley that McKinley had delivered. Although one of the four Germans fought in all German regiments, they created the public image of the German soldier. Pennsylvania fielded 5 German regiments, New York 11 and Ohio 6. Western railroads, with large grants available to attract farmers, set up agencies in Hamburg and other German cities, promising cheap transportation, sales of farmland on easy terms. For example, Santa Fe Railroad hired as its own commissioner for immigration and sold over 300,000 acres to German-speaking farmers. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the German Americans showed a high interest in becoming farmers and keeping their children and grandchildren on the land. They needed profits to stay in operation, and they used profits as a tool to maintain continuity of the family. They used risk-averse strategies and carefully planned their inheritance, keeping their land in the family. Their communities showed smaller average farm size, greater equality, less absentee ownership, and greater geographical persistence. As one farmer explained, to protect your family has turned out to be the same thing as protecting your land. Politics. Relatively few German Americans held office, but the men voted once they became citizens. In general, the Protestants and Jews leaned towards a Republican Party, and Catholics were strongly Democratic. When Prohibition was on the ballot, Germans voted solidly against it. They strongly distrusted moralistic crusades, whom they called Puritans. This included the temperance reformers and many popularists. The German community strongly opposed free silver and voted heavily against Crusader William Jennings Bryan in 1896. In 1900, however, many German Democrats returned to their party and voted for Bryan, perhaps because of President William McKinley's foreign policy. World War I. Bond posters depicting caricatures of Germans in World War I as anti-German sentiment increased. During World War I, German Americans were sometimes accused of being too sympathetic to the German Empire. Former President Theodore Roosevelt denounced hyphenated Americanism, insisting that the dual loyalties were impossible in wartime. A small minority came out for Germany or ridiculed the British, as did H.L. Mencken. Similarly, Harvard psychologist Professor Hugo Munsterberg dropped his drops his efforts to mediate between America and Germany and threw his efforts behind the German cause. About 1% of the 480,000 enemy aliens of German birth, enemy foreigners of German birth, were imprisoned in 1917 to 1918. The allegations include spying for Germany or endorsing the German war effort. Thousands were forced to buy war bonds to show their loyalty. The Red Cross banned individuals with German last names from joining in fear of sabotage. One person was killed by a mob in Connorsville, Illinois. German-born Robert Prager was dragged from jail as a suspected spy and lynched. A Minnesota minister was tanned and feathered while he was overheard praying in German with a dying woman. In Chicago, Frederick Stock temporarily stepped down as conductor of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra until he finalised his naturalisation papers. Orchestras replaced music by German composer Wagner with French composer Bolognese. In Cincinnati, the public library was asked to withdraw all German books from its shelves. German-named streets were renamed. For example, in Indianapolis, Germania Avenue was renamed Pershing Avenue for a World War I general of German descent. Even the name of the town, Berlin, Michigan, was changed to Maine, Michigan, honouring those who fought in the Battle of Maine. In Iowa, in 1918, the Babel Proclamation, the governor prohibited all foreign languages in schools and public places, stating English as the national language of the US. Nebraska banned institutions in any language except English, but the US Supreme Court ruled the ban illegal in 1923, Meyer versus Nebraska 48. The response of German Americans to these tactics was often to Americanize their names, such as Schmidt to Smith, Müller to Miller, and limit the use of German language in public places, especially churches. World War II. Between 1931 and 1940, 141 Germans moved to the United States, many of whom, including Nobel Prize winner Albert Einstein, were Jewish Germans or anti-Nazis fleeing the government oppression. About 25,000 people became paying members of the pro-Nazi German-American Bund during the years before the war. German foreigners were subject to suspicion and discrimination during the war, although prejudice and sheer numbers meant they suffered as a group generally less than Japanese Americans. Let me just break off for a second. What is clearly the case is that without the German Americans in the Pacific, in the US Marines especially, perhaps the Americans wouldn't have won in the Pacific. It's quite possible. The Allen Registration Act of 1940 required 300,000 German-born residents, foreigners, to register with the federal government and restrict their travel and property ownership rights. Under the still active Alien Enemy Act of 1798, the United States government interned nearly 11,000 German immigrants between 1940 and 1948. Most were not American citizens. Some of these were United States citizens, some were parents of active military men. Civil rights violations occurred. 500 were arrested without warrant, others were held without charge for months or interrogated without benefit of legal counsel. Convictions were not eligible for appeal. An unknown number of voluntary internees joined their spouses and parents in the camps and were not permitted to leave. President Franklin D. Roosevelt did not hesitate to name Americans of German ancestry to top war jobs, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, and General Carl Andrew Spaatz.